Hi, everyone. Give every moment, few moments for folks to join. I see folks are starting to come in. Hopefully, everyone's having a good afternoon. Got Nathan and Russell. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. We got 22 folks, so we'll give it another minute or so, and then we'll get things kicked off. All right. Got 26 folks, 25 folks. So yeah, maybe we'll just get started. So thank you all for joining. My name is Preston Aitken. I work at Blackbaud. I am an account executive working in Canada. I manage our strategic higher education vertical here. So I'm based up in Toronto, and it's so nice to be here today and connect with many of you. I will be sort of the moderator and assisting in the background. So for folks that are asking questions and things like that, I'll do my best to monitor that and pass it off to Russell and Nathan. But really, they're the stars of the show today. So I'll pass things off to Russell at Parkinson's Foundation to sort of do his introduction and then jump right into it.
I am Russell Presgraves. I am the Director of Development and Data Systems at the Parkinson's Foundation. And I have been with the foundation and one of its predecessor organizations for about 11 years now.
And I am Nathan Klein. I work as a full stack web developer for DNL Omnimedia. I've been excited to be in this position for just a couple of years now, and yeah, definitely enjoying it.
Awesome. So I'm gonna leave the stage and over to you, Russell and Nathan.
Thank you.
Oh. Our journey towards this process began several years ago when I had to do a staff training for our field staff to try and get people who were basically web view users to go into database view and enter their volunteer information in the volunteer module. We were not particularly successful at getting people to do that. So other things happened. We had the pandemic. We took a little bit of time to kind of rethink and refigure our volunteer program. So currently, there is a Luminate survey, which is we call the volunteer interest form. Someone will fill that out. That gets passed over into Razor's Edge as an action via Omedia Cloud. The team then reaches out to the person and has them take a training. So as we've rethought it, it is now considered a journey. This great visual kind of represents what we're trying to do with the data and the functionality, what we need to track. One thing that has changed since we rethought the program is there is now a much stronger focus on getting volunteers to sign waivers, which means it became necessary to do more attachment tracking inside of RE. We are also now trying to require trainings as well. So we have a general orientation and then an ambassador training, which will get people into basically the initial level of volunteering. And then when they are trained as ambassadors, we try to work them up the volunteer pipeline to have more complex and important roles. And typically, our ambassadors are engaged in community outreach, doing a lot of tabling, We now have 289 people as of April who have completed the ambassador training and are out working in the community. So with that introduction, I will start the video.
I'm not hearing any sound, Russell. Yeah, there's supposed to be sound. Looks like we're having a slight glitch there. So we'll be working on it. Sorry about that, all of you. Yeah, we tested it a couple minutes ago. Oh, there we go.
Blackbaud Sky Add-in feature. Blackbaud has a really useful feature called the Sky Add-in that you can use. And here I'm in the documentation. You can use to add these complementary features that integrate deeply with the user interface. We are going over this because we are going to show you just how we integrated this feature into the user interface, specifically into the constituent interface in Razor's Edge. As you can see in Razor's Edge, when you're in a constituent's admin interface, there are a lot of different tiles, we call them, little tiles, and you can build your own tiles using the Sky add-in. And here's an example of a tile that has been built. According to the documentation, you can add custom tiles, buttons, flyouts, and modals in order to bring data that isn't natively in, say, in a constituent's admin interface. You can bring external data into that. In our case, in our situation, we're going to look at custom tiles and modals. Those are the two that we have implemented here. In this case, we have brought in Razor's Edge volunteer data and matched it with data from other services to bring about this custom tile. So to go over this, what we did in more depth, we used the Sky add-in feature. So in the code itself, what you can do, well, I'll just show you in our case. In the code itself, we used a JavaScript package provided by Blackbaud. I'll show that to you really quickly. We used a JavaScript package provided by Blackbaud called Sky add-in client, and we integrated it with a Laravel installation so that the front end uses JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and the back end uses PHP, and they're all within this Laravel installation. And then we followed the steps provided in the documentation such that we were able to add this tile. And as you can see, it has a lot of different customized features that we built ourselves, including these tabs and including buttons. note that the way this is possible is through the use of iframes. So the tile here integrates an iframe, and that iframe loads in a URL, an external URL that is provided by us. Now we built this custom page with its own URL, and it's brought into this iframe. Now within this iframe, within this Sky add-in, we're able to actually integrate a Sky add-in within a Sky add-in. So for instance, in this tile, we are also integrating Sky add-in modals. So you notice we have these buttons here, the new volunteer role and the edit button, and each of these will open a modal, and these are modals that are actually provided by Blackbaud, and we just provided, again, we provided the code for display purposes and the URL. So this modal loads in another iframe from us, and it is displaying the styling that we integrated. And when you click the save button, it closes the modal and passes the data back to the original tile, and it also runs an action in the backend in PHP. So it's basically calling an API against our Laravel installation and accomplishing tasks. So just to get it started, in order to use this, the URL that you provide to the front end, to the tile, must implement that JavaScript package. It must initialize some code. I'll show you really quickly how that works, just very briefly. So you have to, in the JavaScript, and there are other ways of doing it. Most of them will utilize JavaScript in some sense, and some Blackbaud package, a JavaScript package in some sense. But in our case, we just used vanilla JavaScript to initialize the client. The client is loaded in a layout. We loaded it in a head. This worked best for us. It's not the only way, but it was the most intuitive and effective for us in our case. But then we can initialize this function called init, and if done correctly, with identity checked correctly, then it will call show UI true with the title, and that's what and it'll load all your front end code that you see. So going into more specifics as to what we're doing here, as you can see, we are loading in volunteer data. We call it volunteer test because it's a sandbox environment. But we are loading in volunteer roles, activities, volunteer attachments, and volunteer training. Now, roles and activities actually do come from, at least in part, come from the Blackbaud database view. However, they're not available via API, so we imported the ones from the database view, and we actually provided a means of creating new volunteer roles and new volunteer activities. So you can enter a new volunteer role here, and as I said, this calls Sky add-in, and the Sky add-in, it passes the constituent data to this new Sky add-in, allowing us to verify it and maintain it. You'll notice in this we have some drop downs. These are each their own database tables in our Laravel installation. We're using MySQL to save all this data, a database warehouse. And so these are relational databases that allow us to relate the volunteer type to a volunteer role, volunteer statuses to a volunteer role, regions and chapters. And I'll show you activities as well. Those have a lot of activity options as well that are related to it. So you can create a new, volunteer. And in fact, if you wanted to create a former one, you could. We'll create a current one. Discuss that in more depth in a minute. Provide it with these details. Some of them are optional. Some of them are required. Let's say they started this around a month ago. They haven't finished it yet, so it's a current role. And as you can see, it was immediately passed back to our volunteer tile. And in fact, that was passed back before, or at the same time as it was being saved in the database warehouse. So if I refresh this, it'll still be here, but this current data actually isn't from the database, it's from the modal that I just had open. So if I refresh, it'll still be there, passed now passed back from the database and in the same format, the same way. But as you can see, opening that SkyAdded modal, we could still pass the data from that SkyAdded, and once we closed that modal, we were able to pass that data back to the original SkyAdded custom tile. Notice that we have on this the ability to edit as well. So I created this one. It was created. I had it started a little bit before this one, the one above it, so it showed up in the proper order. But now I can go in and edit it, make any changes I wanted to say. Oh, they're not in Gulf Coast. They're in Minnesota. So we can save. Boom, that chapter changed. If I were to refresh, it would also have changed as well. Still being maintained. Yeah, so the data entered or modified by an admin saves to a volunteer role table in Parkinson's Foundation's data warehouse and is linked by that NXT system record ID. So the system record ID of that constituent is linked to the volunteer in the database, and therefore we're able to load in all those volunteer roles and also activities. Notice here we also have like current and former tags. Those are based on date finished, or yeah, those are based on date finished. If a constituent is deceased, we have a process by which we would flip those from current. Even if they didn't have a date finished, we would add a date finished and flip those from current to former in the status. But the tag itself is based on whether or not they have a date finished. Moving on to activities. Again, this is still in that custom tile. I've loaded in this list of activities from the data warehouse. I'm able to create new volunteer activities and edit current volunteer activities just as I did for roles. Just do a quick one. So the activity, and this is what the kind of the bolded title is of each one is that activity. You can add details, chapters. You do have to add a date. So I say the date took place on Saturday. Add hours, show how many they took. And that's really all you're required to do. Since this is now their most recent activity, shows up at the top of this list. Go in and edit it. Say, oh, actually, it wasn't 5 hours, 7. And it was this presentation topic. And there we have it. We refresh. I'll have to click on that activities tab again, but it will all be there. So we're able to save, we're able to create and modify activities. We're able to display that historical data from the database or that external data warehouse using API calls. It's linked again by that system constituent system record ID. We also have a forthcoming enhancement to allow constituents in the Luminate Online Member Center to submit a survey with the new activity details, and then our data warehouse will sync that data from Luminate Online using web services and then display that data here, following these same processes. So you're able to integrate not only our Razor's Edge data and not only just like custom data that we custom save to the database, but we can integrate and display Luminate Online data as well. Moving on to attachments. The attachments are actually a combination of constituent attachments and constituent actions. So for instance, here you see that we have several not on file, and we've used some custom CSS and JavaScript to style these so that they are disabled and they have that handy dandy icon when you hover over them. We have it set up in the JavaScript and the HTML so that when you click on this button, it will actually open the Blackbaud URL for the attachment. Or if we had a volunteer interest form on file, which is actually an action, it would construct the action URL and open a new volunteer, or open the volunteer action in Blackbaud as well, in RENXT. This is just a fake. Well, this is a PDF, so it actually downloaded it for me. It's a fake one, so I could show it to you. But in this case, it's not important. You'll also notice at the top of the screen here, we have an alert that says this volunteer has untagged attachments. Because of the fact that running reports can be so difficult in order to figure out if constituents have attachments and if they have the attachments that are required, this actually simplifies the process. One need not view the attachments. You can say, oh, an untagged attachment. Oh, should we run it and tag this? And you can scroll down to this tile with attachments, and you can see that one of them is tagged volunteer handbook, and that's the one that shows up in the Sky adding tile, and this one is untagged, and that's why that alert is populated. In the back end, I am checking. I have synced constituent attachments into the database, the data warehouse, and because of that, I'm able to say, hey, this attachment is missing, or this attachment is missing tags, therefore it needs to be tagged, or these attachments do have tags and they match up to volunteer handbook or volunteer interest form, or volunteer waiver. Volunteer interest form is actually an action, a Sky API action, or a constituent action. For volunteer role agreements, we can actually show a list here if it had any. In this case, I do not, but it would actually show any that were tagged role agreements. So whenever this attachment tabs is active, what's actually happening behind the scenes in the JavaScript, and this is true for each of these tabs, it's making an API call to the data warehouse, and that API call is actually using authorization, Laravel built-in authorization, in order to verify that this is a valid person who has the right to view these details. It's set up so that when we initially open this page, we authorize the admin who is using this page, and then we also authorize the constituent that they're viewing, and then we create an authorization token that we pass back to the custom tile that is then passed between the tiles, whether you're passed between the modals and also, just kept, obviously this is all the same tiles, it's different screens. So you can have a single page, basically a single page application that has, multiple pages. Regardless, we're authorizing the API call and then bringing in the relevant data, whether it's activity, roles, activities, attachments, or training. Roles are brought in by default, but then activities, attachments, and trainings are brought in separately. Moving on to trainings. Here we provide a list of volunteer trainings that have been completed by the constituent. These are linked to that system record ID again. And they actually come from an external system called Ethos, which is a learning management system. The data warehouse is listening to a webhook actually from Ethos, and it saves the raw course completion data, multiple different ones, course completion, course enrollment, and other data as well. there is a matching constituent in Luminate Online that aligns to this user. And we're syncing both the constituent from Luminate Online to the data warehouse and the constituent from Razor's Edge. We're able to link that Luminate Online user to the Ethos user, and the Luminate Online user also to the Razor's Edge user, Razor's Edge constituent. And then we're able to use the Ethos ID or email address. Really, we use the email address to initially link that Ethos user to the Luminate Online user, and then we're able to save their Ethos ID and use that in the future, so that we're able to keep the constituents matched together. And then we're able to process the data that's been submitted. And as you can see, we list it in styles. We have each of these classes has parent classes with children modules, child modules. So we're able to show parent completions, and sometimes in certain cases child completion, child module completion as well, the completion date. This data is processed and submitted to the data warehouse, as I said. It's also submitted to a Luminate survey, so that it's backed up within Luminate Online as well. We have multiple course completions that we don't show, but we're able to categorize our courses based on, in certain ones we've categorized volunteers. That way I only show the volunteer courses here. So we're assembling all this data and listing it here. Moving on to another part of this whole tile that's very invisible, but has a very active role. We're able to do daily jobs, run daily jobs in the data warehouse that verifies that the roles are up to date. So for instance, if someone puts an end date on their role, but forgets to split the status from current to former, it would still get flipped to former in this green tag here, which switch to this gray former tag. But we can also, there's a job that runs behind the scenes in the middleware, built via PHP, that queries the database for roles that have ended, and if they have ended, it switches their status from current to former. It also checks to see if the volunteer is deceased. So if a volunteer is marked as deceased, then it will go in on a daily basis and check that, and it will mark them as former, and it will mark their date as finished on the date they were marked as deceased. Notice another thing we have going, another part of the job is it adds a custom field to the constituent showing their volunteer status, whether it's active or inactive. So for most constituents who have never volunteered, they will never have a volunteer status period in their custom fields. But for the ones who have been a volunteer at some point, they'll either have a custom field that is active or inactive, just depending on their status. And that's checked on a daily basis by the data warehouse. This allows for running reports in Razor's Edge so that you can get a list of all your volunteers, gather those details. So that is the primary, these are the primary results of this work with the custom tile. And that you can see there's a lot of different functionality you can add to a constituent, or really anywhere in Razor's Edge. Well, they have limitations on where you can place it, but wherever you can place it, you can have this sort of data or other data. Really anything you can save to an external source and then display is possible. Yeah, as I said, we're using HTML, JavaScript. We also have CSS. We have a controller in our Laravel installation that is what's being called by those APIs, or what is being displayed, what is being called to display the front end. So using PHP, and we have validation rules in place. We use JWT to validate based on, or to authorize based on the authorization flow presented in the Blackbaud documentation. You can read about it if you would like. Wrong direction. Yeah, you could read about it in the Sky edit in the authorization documentation. Yeah, we have used the supported authorization flow. That concludes this presentation.
There you have the video.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Russell, Nathan. That was awesome, and it's pretty neat what you folks have been able to do. I do have a couple questions that were submitted through the text Q&A. So for folks that have additional questions, feel free to put that either in the chat or text to the Q&A. So the questions that we have so far, and the first one is for you, Russell. So the question is, are you an accidental technologist? What sort of skills did you bring to the partnership? And how did you balance this project against your development responsibilities?
Highly accidental. I was in a previous life a database manager in the for-profit world and transitioned over to nonprofit with my job at the Parkinson's Foundation. So my, I guess, skills at the table are kind of giving the outline of what we want to happen and then working more directly with our volunteer staff.
Awesome. And good point, Bo. I did launch the survey. So for folks, please don't leave without completing the survey. It's very important to get feedback on the sessions. As mentioned, there is tickets to BBCon on the line, so definitely please fill that out. Another question that came in from Kelly, was there tension thinking of building something custom that could be irrelevant if when Blackbaud brings the volunteer table out to NXT natively?
Well, sure. But I think that our volunteer program got a little more complicated than the native, at least the database view version can manage. So this enables us to link to Luminate constituents, activity going on in our learning management system, and is a much broader portfolio than the native volunteer module.
Great, makes sense. And then Aaron has a question. Could the volunteer tile only dynamically appear if the constituent has volunteer data and not otherwise?
Technically, yes. What's easier to do, well, in the case for our purposes, because we wanted to be able to add like roles and activities, that didn't make much sense. But yeah, technically you could have the tile only be initialized based on certain requirements. So yeah, if you wanted to say like, hey, this constituent doesn't have any data, don't show the volunteer tile, and yeah, the tile would never actually show up in the NXT.
I mean, we would actually prefer our staff to see that there is no data so that they know that they need to get a waiver and take the training.
Right, yeah. And there are a few use cases for you guys where you did need that to show up no matter what, for sure.
Another question is, how many volunteers are managed at National Parkinson, and is this scalable to, say, large volunteer programs?
So we are now up to 1,100, maybe 1,200 who have actually filled out the interest form. I believe this, I mean, it is fairly new that we have been working with that format and actually soliciting people to volunteer on our website. So I expect that we will be needing to scale it soon.
And it is scalable, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
The systems should be able to handle more scale without any issues. I mean, they're already handling, millions of constituents, so yeah, should be no trouble.
Awesome. That's it. Unless anyone has any final questions, we have 37 folks still on. Feel free to add any additional questions in the text Q&A if you have them. We'll wait for another minute or so, and then if not, we'll just wrap her on up early. But we'll wait for any additional final questions or comments. And Ben had a nice comment there. Thanks, Ben. Okay, we got a question just coming in. Perfect. So this is from Kelly. Has Parkinson's thought about quantifying the value these high-level volunteers bring? So like thinking ROI.
Yes, I actually have that on another slide. So we have estimated $400,000 is the value of the volunteer activity over the last year.
How did you quantify that?
So we looked at the time and if a staff person had been needed to fulfill that role, how much it would have cost.
Got it. Makes sense. That makes sense. Any final questions, folks? Otherwise, we are good to wrap. Make sure, like I said, if you haven't done the survey yet, hopefully, please complete that. Awesome. I think we're good here then. So thanks everyone for joining today. Thanks again, Russell, Nathan, for your expertise, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of BB Dev Days. We're almost, I guess, it's almost wrapped up now. All right. Take care, folks.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.